Welcome to the Financial Flossing podcast with Ross Brannon, guiding dental professionals to a brighter future. Ross Brannon is a financial advisor who knows it's not just about your teeth. He helps dental practice owners protect and maximize today's cash flow to plan for tomorrow's cash needs. Find him at rossbrannon.com. On the show, he brings together experts to help dental professionals looking to make smart money decisions to grow their income, turn their retirement goals into reality, and improve their lives. And now, here's your host, Ross Brannon.
Welcome to the show. Today we have a special guest, Adam Carroll, author, speaker, and creator of the Shred Method. Adam, thanks for coming on.
Ross, it's my pleasure. Great to be here.
Well, first question is, what's the Shred Method?
Yeah, the Shred Method is a very unique cash flow tool used by dentists.
Hold on. Cash flow. You said cash flow. It's a pretty important thing in life, would you say?
It's an incredibly important thing that most people don't know how to leverage appropriately.
All right, so sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
It's a cash flow tool.
Cash flow tool that helps people create income efficiency. And what that means, Ross, is most people, they make money, the money flows through a checking account, but it sits there for days or weeks or months on end.
If they don't spend it all.
If they don't spend it all. And all the while we're paying expenses elsewhere that we don't need to. And so we teach them how to truly leverage and deploy their cash flow efficiently.
Now, when you talk about this,
Yeah.
this is not something, because I know a little bit about it because you and I talked, obviously, but this is not something just for people who are struggling to make ends meet. It's not something just for uber wealthy people. It's for everybody, right?
It's for everybody. It's for everybody. Now, here's what I will say. We try and regulate who we let in because there are some people that don't have the discipline. And this does require a bit of discipline, though it's all supported by a piece of software that we basically call a behavior modification tool. But if someone is overspending their income on the regular, they're not a good fit for us, right? We're looking for people who have more money at the end of their month, not more month at the end of their money.
Okay, so one of the things I first asked you when we talked before we were recording, I said, Adam, how are you different from Dave Ramsey? Because when I looked you up, I was like, oh, this is like debt snowball, get out of debt, which everyone should get out of debt. And the debt snowball is a good way of getting out of debt. Dave Ramsey helps a ton of people out. I would submit, though, most of Dave Ramsey's clientele aren't listening to this podcast because this is a higher socioeconomic ladder of people or level of people. So, and that's nothing against Dave Ramsey. So for people who might be confused, let's kind of take a quasi deep dive on what this is. And then after we talk about that, let's figure how it came to be.
Yeah. Well, and I want to touch on that really quick, the difference between Dave Ramsey or the Dave Ramseyites out there and I. I think he's talking to a subset of people that find themselves in tremendous financial stress. And so they're looking for, his word, financial peace. And so the way he does it is he takes you through the 5 baby steps, and it's no debt, no debt, no debt. We're different in that we generally are attracted to and get attracted to people who have, as you have mentioned, higher incomes. They're typically pretty savvy, but they're looking for a way to get ahead. They want to squeeze more return out of their rental properties. They want to make sure that they're creating more equity. They want to retire early. These are the folks that come to us. And so we're teaching them how to have debt, but to have debt very intelligently, where the debt is being used in a way that's not oppressive. And I might add here that, your claim to fame is you help people reduce taxes, which is one of the largest expenses anyone ever has in life.
Absolutely.
And what we do is we help people reduce the other largest expense that people have, which is the interest expense on debt. And there's a way to hold that leverage intelligently without, getting taken to the cleaners on the expense of that debt that you're holding.
Right. All right. So that's very helpful. So let's start from kind of very simplistically break down the Shred Method or the concept of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I'm going to go back in the Wayback Machine to tell you where it came from for me. Back in, now you're going to make fun of me probably, Ross, but I started a mortgage company in 2007. Seemed like good timing.
Probably not the best timing, but go on.
Yeah, my wife questioned my sanity at the time, but I had this like higher morality that was calling me to create the first socially responsible mortgage company in my state.
You weren't selling option arms on your mortgages?
I was not. And in fact, I came out of
I owned an option arm at that point in time, by the way.
Did you? What was the interest rate on it?
I was fairly low, but the fact that you had the ability to pay because it wasn't long after that, the rates went to zero.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the fact that you had the 4 different options to choose, and from a behavioral finance standpoint, I'd like to know who didn't pick the lowest option.
Right.
So
yeah, it was the Wild West. I mean, I was working for a wholesaler prior to starting the mortgage company, and they were seriously talking about 40 and 50-year amortization schedules. I mean, doing a 50-year AM just to get payments down to where people could afford it. So
where car financing is going now, like 84 months on cars now.
I know I've heard 10 years on Teslas if you want. I mean, this is the problem, right? You have people who are uneducated. They just want to know, can I make the payment? And I was watching people refinance their homes over and over and over again through us, in fact. And I would say, when we got through the truth in lending disclosure, we would say, well, this is just the government's way of depressing you, sign here. We didn't pay any credence to it. It was just like, hey, you borrowed 300,000, you're going to pay 600,000 back by the time it's all said and done, but just sign here. And I was realizing and feeling kind of odd or ill about the fact that I'm asking you to sign this, but you don't really understand what I'm asking you to sign. And that is that you're going to pay twice what you've borrowed, and you keep doing it. You keep refinancing it just to add more debt to this thing. And so a friend of mine had introduced the concept of the shred method to me. It was not called that at the time. And it goes by a number of different names. There's other people out there who do something similar, but we feel like we have advanced it in the sense that it now runs on a piece of software that tells you exactly what to do. And in 2012, my wife and I agreed, we're going to go hard to the hoop on this thing. We had a $250,000 mortgage, and we reduced it to zero in 3.7 years.
That's not a bad day at the office.
It was good. And in the process, we saved $180,000 in interest. So you can imagine, you get to that day where you've paid off the mortgage, and now you have an extra, I think we were at $2,000 or $2,100 a month or something that we add in now discretionary income, and lived that way for about 9 months. Rates dipped to 2.875. And I was like, well, we did it once, we can do it again. Let's go borrow $300,000 against our mortgage we just paid off at 2.875. Go deploy that somewhere that will make passive income. And then let's begin shredding again. And we managed to get that loan shredded in about 3.5 years. We did it even faster the second time. So we teach people how to do this. And in my mind, we just wash, rinse, and repeat, and we do it over and over again. And in the process, we build, pretty tremendous wealth.
So the average person, or not average, most people are going to think, what did you do? Just pay extra on your mortgage for 3.5 years? Because that's what everyone thinks you did, but that's not what you did, right?
It's not. In fact, what I would call what we did is we leveraged income efficiency. We made our income far more efficient in the process of cycling through our household. And I like to give an analogy or metaphor for this, Ross. So if you knew you had to go to the grocery store in the morning, and you left your home at, let's say, 8 a.m., went to the grocery store, came back, and then you knew you were going to go to the post office at 3 or 4 in the afternoon, would you leave your car idling in the driveway all day?
No.
Why not?
Because you're wasting gas.
You are wasting gas. And it'd be hard on the environment and hard on your car, and et cetera, et cetera. It's inefficient. And yet what we do as consumers and as business owners, as dentists out there, is money comes in and it sits in our checking account, business checking, personal checking, and it sits for days or weeks or months on end. All the while, we are burning gas by paying interest on amortized debt, which could be in the form of commercial loans, could be equipment loans, could be student loans, could be our primary mortgage. And so what we're doing is saying, as that income rolls through, we just want to make sure the velocity of money is in action. And so
that's a very important term. You described that, velocity of money.
Yeah.
And so that's when you get a dollar to do more than one thing. And typically, traditional financial advising or planning has no idea what velocity of money is and doesn't understand it. And you're getting a dollar to do only one thing. Your dollar is growing in your investment account. Your dollar is sitting in your mortgage. So when you can get a dollar to do more than one thing, typically that creates a multiplier effect. So talk about velocity of money as it is involved with the shred method.
Yeah. So I love this line of questioning because let's just take an average dentist. What might an average dentist starting out in the first 5 years of their career make?
Well, let's suppose they own their own practice and let's suppose they make $500K.
Okay. So someone making $500K, and let's say they have a million, 800,000 to $1.2 million, $1.5 million home that they're buying.
I think that's reasonable.
Probably a car loan or 2 or 4 if they have
Does
kids.
anyone not have a car loan now?
Yeah, highly doubtful. We don't, but
I know you don't.
There's a story behind that. So what I would ask someone like that is, would having an extra $60,000 to $80,000 or $100,000 a year be meaningful for you to invest or to put to work somewhere?
I don't know anybody who would say no.
Right. And even people who are making $100,000 or $200,000 a year, when I say to them, if you had an extra 30 to 50 grand a year, would you be excited by that? And they're like, oh my gosh, absolutely, I would. Well, what we don't realize, and again, going back to my comment about you help people minimize tax liability, which is a real cost, and the interest expense on debt is a real cost, but it's avoidable. And so when people start using shred and they're 6, 8, 12 months, 18 months in, what we're doing is we're clawing back somewhere between 10 and 20% of their income that they're normally paying in interest expense. And the reason we're doing that is your dollars are actually going to eradicate the debt that is accruing that interest. And so in the meantime, what we're doing, if we're paying off a home or we're paying off your practice debt, is we're increasing the equity that you have either in your home or your practice, making it more valuable, increasing your net worth. So advisors typically, Ross, love us because we're doing 2 things. We're increasing your client's net worth, and we're increasing the liquidity that they have to be able to drop 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 grand at a time into investments that make sense for them when it makes sense for them. And this is money that they had been sending off to a banker to pay interest. And we're just rewiring the system.
Okay, so there's a lot of details here that, quite frankly, people will have to get kind of off your website or through a consultation. But talk a little bit about, your friend introduced this to you, but what was the epiphany? And because you said there's a couple other people out there. I've seen one we talked about before, but is this a kind of a newer thing to the people who are out there? Because they're out there, they will say, oh, this is just a gimmick.
Yep.
Talk
too good to be true. Yep.
So poke holes in all the objections that are out there because you've heard them a million times.
Yeah. Well, the way this began was in Australia, and this is known as an Australian mortgage, technically. And this would be the term given to it 20 years ago.
Okay.
An Australian mortgage was called that because there was a bank in Australia called Macquarie Bank. And Macquarie, when they gave someone a mortgage, they would also give them what they called a sweep account. And the sweep account is where their income went in, but it was essentially attached to the equity of their home. So in effect, it was like a home equity line of credit, though they didn't call it that. So money would go into the sweep account, they'd pay their bills out of the sweep account, and whatever was left over would sweep into the mortgage, bringing the mortgage balance down. And what they found was that
because of that, the mortgage, less interest accrued every day.
That's exactly right. Yep.
Now, how long before the Australian banks realized this is a bad thing? We got to get rid of this.
Well, this is the interesting twist in this. So they tried bringing it to the United States, and they started leveraging these sweep accounts in Macquarie Bank and the Australian mortgage in the US. And it sort of had this heyday where a number of people were celebrating it and using it. And a couple of things happened. Number one, people were like, too difficult, too complicated. I have to keep track of all these numbers and do the math. I'm not going to do it anymore. And you and I both know this, in being in the advising space, is that it's status quo bias, right? When presented with the opportunity of doing something or doing nothing, people will do nothing. They revert back to the mean. And I think that's what happened is people are like, don't understand the math, too complicated, not my thing.
And there was no big marketing machine behind it to push it.
No software, no behavioral prompts.
And this was like
that.
What, mid-90s?
This had been mid-90s and maybe even in early 2000s. And then, other people came about and said, oh, I created a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet that you can plug your numbers in and it'll tell you what to do. And again, it's like, yeah, but then I got to balance my checkbook and no one's telling me what to do. And people just they reverted back to old habits. And I think what's happening now is people are realizing, and this is my own take on this, but if I drive within a mile radius of my house, there is a $10 to $20 million bank building either being built or already constructed. And there's a 2-mile stretch where there's literally 22 different financial institutions all building massive buildings. And so I think people start to go, wait a minute, if banks are this profitable, why are they this profitable? And not to vilify them because it's their business model.
But it's easy to vilify them.
It is easy to vilify, particularly when you see the level of profit that is had at the bank level year after year after year. And I think what we're doing is we're just saying, hey, you can re-engineer how your finances are done and claw back all the interest that or a majority, maybe not all, but a majority of the interest that you've been paying to these banks all these years, and actually then apply it to your own net worth building.
Interesting. So how many people have gone through the shred method?
Currently we have around 200 subscribers to the software. We have about 100, what we would call lifetime members, people who came on earlier that had a lifetime arrangement with us. And we probably have another 150 that have come and gone. They've been through the program. They either paid stuff down, paid it off, and matriculated out.
What is the percentage of people who join your program who see success?
I would say, and this is a bit of a shot in the dark, but we are probably in the 80% success range.
Because some people just aren't going to follow through.
Right. And we generally have folks that will come on, they see the power of it, they stick with it, they're addicted, right? They're in it every single day, every single week. We have some that sort of bounce in, bounce out, and we have some that sign up, and it's the same thing they're doing with a lot of different services. It feels like a magic bullet, but they never really put in the time. But those that do, within the first 6 to 12 months, they will save tens of thousands of dollars in interest.
So give me some testimonials. Tell me about John. Tell me about John Doe, your client, keeping them their name confidential, but give me some stories of people.
Yeah, I just had a call just the other day. The note is sitting here on my desk. He's a gentleman who works for a software company, and he's a CFO of a fairly successful, well-known software company. And first I said, how did you hear about us? And he goes, I heard you on a podcast, which is kind of our organic way of becoming known. And he said, this is a genius piece of financial engineering. And I said, can I use this quote verbatim? He goes, absolutely.
You have it all over your website.
Now, he is 32, CFO, was kind of a wonderkin, but he will have his entire house paid off in 2.2 years.
I'm going to guess this is not a starter home.
He's in Denver, so hard to find. It's
not Silicon Valley.
It's not Silicon Valley, and he's not a slouch, but he's probably making about the same as what your listeners might make. So this is one success story. We have a realtor who is a huge fan of ours. She's an eXp Realty agent, and she paid her car off and her home off in 5 months. Now, she turned it on to some of her rental properties, and then she starts using the equity in her rental properties to buy more rentals. So she did this like in rapid fashion.
Here's a question for you. What if you have an inconsistent income? What if you're performance-based? What if you're commission and you're not just straight salary?
Yeah, this is great. So this is part of the beauty of using the line of credit. And part of our coaching mechanism is teaching people that if you have super ups and downs in your income, we're going to try and help you normalize or level out what your expenses are going to be on a monthly basis. But when those peaks come in, you have a really good month or two, you're going to see this massive drop in equity, increase in equity, drop in principal owed on those months. And it's going to advance the amortization table by more than likely years and years. I mean, we've seen people advance an amortization table by 7 to 10 years in one payment. So that's where we start talking about, you drop $100,000 in, you might be saving 150 to 200 in interest just by doing that one time.
All right. So can you give me some specifics? Like this person saved, X dollars in those scenarios.
Yep. So we have a gentleman named Jeremy. He is a sales executive, probably makes about $300,000 a year. But he was one of those stereotypical families, like had the primary residence, had 2 car payments, was going on a third because his kid was turning 16, didn't own a second home, was dollar cost averaging into the market for retirement. And when we showed him Shred, he paid off his, I think it was a $400,000 home, but he paid that off in just under 3 years. He saved in the process about $260,000 in interest. Once he was mortgage free, they turned around and bought a property in Florida as a vacation home, turned it into an Airbnb rental. And the Airbnb income from that property pays 90% of his mortgage every year. So here's a guy who within 5 years literally doubled or more his net worth and increased his cash flow on a monthly basis. In addition, paid off the cars and all of that. So he's got massive discretionary income, owns his home free and clear, has equity in a rental property. And now he's like, what else can I shred? And that generally is what happens with people.
You tell him just to go buy a car and finance it so he can shred it?
Sometimes. Although what we tell him honestly, Ross, is, okay, it's time to go pick out the next property, because you're going to want to shred the next property and make sure the income from that pays your car payment if you want to buy a new car.
So it's a subscription based system.
It is.
Talk about how do you guys train people? How much does it cost? Talk about the whole program.
Yeah. So we have a few options for people who come in. If you're a do-it-yourselfer, we have a course that you go through. It's $1,197, so $1,200. And by the way, I mean, even if you annualize that, $100 a month, you're going to save that times 10 in month one, when you follow the system. So $1,197, it's $47 a month to use the software. And what we tell people is that is really the behavior modification tool. So you're going to get in, you're going to log in.
$47 a month is free.
It's free. I mean, it really is super cheap. It's so reasonable.
It's super cheap. The only problem is it might be so free, people won't take it. They won't actually use it. They'll just be like their Netflix bill just hit. But yeah, but you could $47. You could totally take a gamble of $150 to give it a shot, and boom, But you've got people, they pay $47. They just might pay it forever just because they want to just keep doing it. And now, do you guys have regular trainings, or is it? I mean, how's it work?
We do. We have coaching calls that we'll do one-on-one. We have group calls that happen 3 times a month. We are constantly updating the training and sending out webinars. And so this for us, we're building a community of shredders who want to do more than just shred their mortgage or shred their commercial debt. These are folks who want to invest heavier with guys like you. They want to create massive, passive, permanent streams of income so they don't have to work forever. And we're showing them all the different ways to do that and just introducing them to certain ideas and concepts that Shred affords them the ability to do.
So let me ask you a question here. And this might be a little too technical for this call. So let's suppose I have a mortgage with Truist Bank. My mortgage is 2.875%. Now, one thing I've heard about this, do I have to refinance my mortgage with a different company to set up this sweep account or not?
Nope, not at all. Not at all. And in fact, and you'll love this, Ross, this like, hopefully your listeners would buckle in for this, really listen carefully on this one. Because if you are emotionally tied to your interest rate, and I'm sure you are at 2.875 with Truist.
Yeah, I am.
But if you use Shred for a period of time, even let's say 12 to 18 months, and you took let's say a $500,000 mortgage down to $250,000, And you could do that using Shred fairly rapidly. You can call Truist and request a mortgage recast. And a recasting of your mortgage simply says, I was at 500 at 2875. I'm now at 250, 2875, but I still have 28 years remaining on my mortgage. How much is my payment now? And for $250, they'll recast your mortgage and get a super low payment.
I mean, if you're doing that, in my opinion, that's not worth it, because in some ways it negates what you're doing. So, but I mean, yes, I have a sub 3% mortgage, so I'm not going to go sell my house and buy another one to get a 7 or 7.5% mortgage. But I got a newsflash: a $0 mortgage is better than a 2.875% interest rate mortgage.
That's true. Well, I'll tell you how I used it. I was a big fan of how do I minimize the amount of my expenses on a monthly basis. This is not going to jive with every one of your listeners, because I know some of them are like, we got doctoritis in the house. Doctors go and outspend their income all the time, or
never
live up to the needs. And so I'm a big fan of, like, build a bigger life, not a bigger lifestyle. The lifestyle is what keeps people working forever and ever. But I want to have a big life. I want to go have freedom and flexibility and travel and do things with my family. So we keep our expenses relatively low. And so through recasting, we had that $300,000 mortgage. We paid it down to about 80 grand. And then I recast it. So I live in a 5,000 square foot home in Des Moines, Iowa. And
which, by the way, 5,000 square foot home in Des Moines, Iowa costs what, like 80 grand a year, 80 grand
yeah,
versus Florida. Like, I'm joking, of course.
Yeah, but you're right. It's probably significantly cheaper. But my monthly payment's $336 a month. So, I don't care if I ever pay that off, because I can leverage the equity in the home in a variety of different ways. And that's one of the strategies we teach shredders.
So when you talk about leveraging the equity, you're not talking about just going to get a home equity line.
We'll get a home equity line, but we might drop 25 or 50 grand at a time into an investment.
Right now, a home equity line might be 9.5%.
Yep. But we don't really care, because our income's cycling through it. So it might be 8 or 9%. But we'll only owe that amount of money for maybe 2 or 3 months before it's paid back down close to zero.
So this is absolutely fascinating. I could probably pepper you with questions for another hour, but for the sake of time, we're going to have to wind this down. So
yeah,
how do people learn more about the shred method?
There's way more information than you probably need at theshredmethod.com. We have a masterclass there. We've got lots of articles, lots of videos, frequently asked questions. And candidly, Ross, if your listeners are somewhat intrigued by this and you're like, well, how much could I save? We have a calculator on the site that will tell you exactly the kind of interest that you can save. And then we're happy to do a 20-minute call with you and walk through your numbers specifically. So
that is awesome. So this is really cool. I think this is a different type of topic for the podcast. And I think it's something that a lot of people, or everyone, if they choose to, could get something out of. And, and by the way, you're running a special right now, $9.97 as opposed to $11.97.
That's right. Time is of the essence. And I will mention this too, Ross, there's a cadre of people out there who believe this is either or. You're either going to do this or you're not going to invest in the market. And I really believe this is a both and scenario. If you're someone who's sitting with some amount of money in a checking or savings account, you can still do shred and be investing and doing dollar cost averaging, maxing out 401ks and Roth IRAs and 529 plans. So this is a both and type of deal. It's just creating another level of efficiency for what you do.
Yeah, this is really cool. Well, Adam, I really appreciate your time on the podcast today. The website is theshredmethod.com. I highly encourage everyone to check it out, see if it makes sense for you. Most people, how about this? Do people use this to knock out student loans?
Oh my gosh, all day, every day. We have a guy, can I do one more success story?
Go for it.
We had a guy who he's one of our just avid fans. He's in our Slack channel every day almost, posting about this. He spent 15 years of his married life making minimum student loan payments to the tune that 80% of his payments went to interest and 20% went to principal.
Wow.
He started using Shred, and in 9 months, 98% of his payments went to principal, 2% went to interest, and he's going to knock out his very last student loan this month. And he said, this, I'd have been paying for 10 more years if I'd made minimum payments. So this is the power of this thing, is we don't question. We live in a banker's business model, and we never question their means. But when you start to like really question their model and play the game against the bank, you can win. And that's what we're teaching people how to do.
That's awesome. Well, Adam, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Ross. Thanks for doing what you do, man. This is super important stuff.
Sure thing. You've been listening to the Financial Flossing Podcast with Ross Brannon.
This has been another episode of Financial Flossing with Ross Brannon, guiding dental professionals to a brighter future. If you liked what you heard, consider subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. For more on Ross Brannon, visit rossbrannon.com.
Ross Brannon is a registered representative, Coastal Equities, Inc., and investment advisory representative, Coastal Investment Advisors, Inc. Investment advisory services are offered through Coastal Investment Advisors, Inc., and securities are offered through Coastal Equities, Inc. Member FINRA, SIPC, 1201 North Orange Street, Suite 729, Wilmington, Delaware, 19801.